Welcome to Session 6 of the 7x7 video series for understanding and applying the SFS. In the previous sessions, we explored how the SFS can be used for group and individual profiling. In this session, we're going to discuss one more strategy in scoring, one that you may find helpful for evaluating your programs and services. And when I say evaluation, I mean convincingly demonstrating that the work you're already doing in your context leads to quantifiable spiritual growth in the three core attributes, which, as we've already discussed in Section 3, have been correlated with many kinds of overall growth in well-being and operational readiness. At the end of this session, we'll also introduce a qualitative companion tool, which can more formally help to bridge scores to coaching, mentoring, and counseling. There's a lot to cover. Let's jump in. There are some occasions in which you really might consider isolating a single subscale and using it to hastily, not haphazardly, but hastily measure growth among individuals or groups in a single specific core attribute. Perhaps you've recently offered a 5-week lunchtime program series on excavating purpose in life and mission accomplishment with some of your service members. Maybe you used the outward mindset resources from the Arbiter Institute or something you like even better. As you came to the end of the 5 weeks, you want to ascertain whether your program has quantifiably impacted spiritual growth, let's say. In that case, why not isolate the pursuit of meaning, purpose, and value, or PMPV, subscale? Of course, the classic standard for sequential scoring is before and after scoring. However, if your program has spanned 5 weeks, there's a risk that any growth you see in change scoring may not be fully attributable to your program. There's a lot that can happen in 5 weeks of life, a lot of what we might call confounding variables in your evaluation scheme. Another difficulty to before and after scoring is that unless you plan to collect PII, you'll need to hope that respondents will retain their baseline score from 5 weeks ago in order to complete the second part of the evaluation. It's actually perfectly reasonable when evaluating your programs using a subscale from the SFS, which after all relies on self-reporting about softer or relatively malleable traits, to use parallel scaling. If you turn to Section 6 in your resource book, you'll see an example of a parallel scaling resource. It's labeled Sample Subscale Hasty Scoring Sheet. It's a mouthful, I know. But take a minute and read the instructions on the left side of that sheet. Then, examine the way the parallel 10-point continua are laid out. You can see how only the questions related to PMPV are listed. And under each question, there are those two continua, one on top of the other. The first continuum is the place for a before score, and the second, directly underneath, is the place for an after score. Essentially, you can have a sheet like this prepped and ready for each of the three subscales. Going back to the scenario about your 5-week training, all you would need to do is pass out a sheet like this to each participant at the end of the final session and have them mark an X on each of the two 10-point continua listed under each PMPV question. After each question, the first 10-point continuum is where they'll mark their before score, locating where, looking back on things, they felt they were before the training. On the second 10-point continuum, they will mark the after score, locating where they are now and considering whether they might have gained something. Voila! As you collect the sheets, you'll now have something quite solid and numerical to report, in addition to whatever verbal feedback you may get about the training. If this were my training, I would prep a slide for my next staff meeting, showing what percentage of participants reported growth and by what margin. I would even pull up the blue and gray percentile table we worked with in Session 4 and see if any of the reported growth or the average reported growth from my training constituted a jump in an entire percentile group. Just one more comment about hasty scoring sheets. I know a chaplain who keeps hasty scoring sheets for each subscale in his office. And when it seems appropriate to him, for instance, when he's really come to know the person or couple well, he'll sometimes ask for a hasty report of before and after scoring to evaluate his coaching or counseling. At first mention, this may sound crazy and destined to be awkward or to interrupt trust and the relational bond of the encounter. On the other hand, coaches, mentors, and counselors in other professions make use of hasty assessments all the time. And they offer such things as an extension of their professional responsibilities, and even as an indication of their professional sophistication and commitment to clients. I'm not twisting your arm at all on that, but if you were able to capture growth assessments on 90% of your program work and even 5% of your individual coaching work, being honest, when those assessments showed no growth or little growth, you could be poised to offer very powerful feedback to your key leaders and also in your multidisciplinary care circles. We're almost out of time. Before we close this session, I'd like to briefly introduce a companion tool to the SFS, something which we call the Spiritual Performance Coaching Grid, or just the grid. If you turn to Section 6 in your resource book, you'll see the grid in bright gold and yellow. The grid itself is pretty self-explanatory. It's a planning tool, and it's a great conversation starter. We've had chaplains use this grid in the check-in process or during leadership workshops or to organize multi-session coaching with a single individual. Whether and how you use it is up to you. Essentially, it's a qualitative tool to support the quantitative scores generated by the SFS. It's been said that in order to really develop an evidence-based approach to any kind of work, both quantitative and qualitative feedback is needed constantly. Without qualitative feedback, numbers are just numbers and don't tell a strong narrative full of the nuance and context of lived experience. That's all we have time for in this session. In our final session, we'll discuss in more detail something we just hinted at a moment ago, that is, how to use both quantitative and qualitative strategies to build sturdy, measurable, evidence-based spiritual fitness and performance programs and services that are customized for your particular context. See you next time.